Swami Vivekananda said, "This life is short, the vanities of the world are transient, but they alone live who live for others. The rest are more dead than alive." Now, without making any further delay, I request our chief guest, Sri Vinayak Lohani ji, to address the speaker.
Revered monks of the Ramakrishna order, respected faculty who are present here, and other friends, students who have come here to attend this special program, I think the annual inaugural program of the Vivekananda Study Circle. A very good evening to you all. I think there is an allotted time of around 1 hour 10 minutes, out of which around 20 minutes are reserved for some interactive question and answers. So before that, I'll just speak. It may be shorter than that time so that we can have more time for some questions and answers. So friends, the theme of the talk which was suggested to me was service as a way of life. Now, speaking on a forum which is named after Swami Vivekananda, the first feeling which any speaker is bound to get is that one can never be fully up to the theme, up to the occasion, because the occasion and the forum, the platform is carrying the name of Swami Vivekananda. So however hard one may try, one may never do complete justice to this particular huge task of speaking on service as a theme and speaking in a forum which is named after Swami Vivekananda. But yeah, given this opportunity, I would like to share on basis of my own experience of say last 11 years or so in building up of my own work. So I'll be speaking strictly by my own experiences, and these should be taken some common learnings which I feel may be useful for all others, for young people in particular. Those I would like to highlight a few such ideas, but they should be still interpreted as say the understanding of one individual based on his limited experience. So friends, I'll just talk briefly about my background. I was born and had my school education in Bhopal in Madhya Pradesh. My father was in the government service in Madhya Pradesh, and thereafter I went to IIT Kharagpur to do BTech. Why did I go there? If this is a question like coming in minds of people, or some people ask me, it's just that, just like in our society, particularly in say kind of middle class, which puts a lot of premium on say education and careers emerging out of academic achievement. So it was like kind of a default option. Very often society presents options to us rather than we making those choices. Though we think, and sometimes I believe even fool ourselves in thinking that we are deciding, but it's actually the norms that the society has placed before us. So in this manner, just like, a student at high school who was say good at say maths and sciences, taking up say mathematics at class 11 level when one had to choose one stream, and then appearing for engineering entrance examination and IIT JEE being the preeminent among such entrance tests, and then managing to qualify and getting into a BTech course, and then at the end of the 4 years again the society placing norms before you, the default options. So sitting through a placement process and then say getting a job. So I, just like anyone else, I went through all these, and from IIT I went into Infosys as a software job, software engineer. So for 1 year I was at Infosys in Bangalore. Now during that time I think I just saw a bit of corporate environment also. So before that, I didn't have any idea. So it was an enjoyable period actually there. So I also, looked at some people like, say, Mr. Murthy, Mr. N.R. Narayan Murthy, as say, an iconic inspirational figure, etc. So it was a good period, but I just wanted to explore other things and wanted to finally decide what I want to do for whole of my life. So I think in a bid to get that space for myself in which I could explore and finally decide that with this purpose I appeared in the CAT for IIMs, the common admission test which is there, and then I got admissions in IIMs, IIM Bangalore, Calcutta. I felt like going to Calcutta, so I joined there. Now after coming to IIM Calcutta within a month or so, I remember that I somehow got disenchanted with where this career will lead me to, because I had some exposure. I had already got a work of having a job, so that sometimes a taste of achievement drives us. So a few of those achievements I tasted in my own humble way. Say some successfully cracking some, say, competitive exams, say IIT, JEE, or I had appeared at GRE also and got a decent score there and was getting scholarships in US university, and then say getting into IIM. So all these things all those achievements were to some extent, you could say, quenched and satisfied. But one cannot go just like that for whole of one's life. Now I seriously wanted to decide what exactly I want to do, because after 1 or 2 months, then there used to be, say, pre-placement talks for summer placements and these kind of things. Lots of companies used to come there. So I think that was a very important period for me, because when I had a look at the people who were coming for these, say, corporate interactions, pre-placement talks, etc., who had experience of, say, 10 years, 15 years, or sometimes much more, then in my mind, I just sometimes got the feeling that I don't want to be in that position, say, after, say, 10, 15 or X number of years. So when I in hindsight, with the advantage of hindsight, if I now try to analyze it, I think that what really inspired me was basically working or building or creating or leading based on something which can be called moral authority, which can be called leadership by certain personal force, leadership by some character force, as against, say, leadership or power which comes through certain position posts. So power or prestige coming through the certain position which you have in any organization, you are, because of your designation, because of your position, that somehow didn't attract me. I was fascinated by people who have actually led or influenced others based on this X factor. It's an X factor because it's very difficult to say from where it's coming, but it was certain to me that it is coming from within that individual, certain power within that individual. The professor discussed here about Mahatma Gandhi. So how he could create one of the largest movements during the freedom movement and how millions followed him. What was the special power which was coming out of? Or say in post-independent India, there are figures. It could be famous figures, it could be not so famous figures. But examples are plenty about on people who are leading by personal example, creating something. We had, say, Vinoba, for example, who had the world's largest land gift movement, Bhudan. How Vinoba one day in an Andhra village, he just thought that he'll appeal to the rich landlords of giving away their surplus land to the landless. So he just tried it and some people accepted, and this motivated him to conduct that. He went on conducting it for 15 years, 13 years he traveled on foot, mainly on foot throughout the length and breadth of the country. And, I mean, how many millions of acres of land were gifted away during Bhudan. So what was that special force which was coming through this individual, which could move other people? This was something remarkable. I actually wanted to have a taste of that, and I felt like developing that to whatever extent possible, having such kind of an ability to inspire people. So there were many examples. Baba Amte was an extraordinary example of a great humanitarian with his work in Maharashtra and with leprosy patients and people with disabilities. How he started in a barren land and created Anandvan, which was totally created by those people only whom society had discarded completely. So these kind of examples were there. So all this actually inspired me to work in this direction, to actually build such abilities within myself, wherein I could develop my own personal life, inner life, and at the same time be of some use to the society. Now the greatest source of inspiration for all these things, obviously, in our modern times, has been Swami Vivekananda. One doesn't need to look beyond Swami Vivekananda. I feel he's an infinite fund of inspiration. Each line which Swami Vivekananda has ever uttered or ever written have a life transforming potential. I know people who had been inspired by a single line, by reading, say, a single line of Vivekananda. I know at least 2 people who have just seen a photograph of Swami Vivekananda and actually inspired to become even monastics in the Ramakrishna order. I personally know 2-3 such people. One was a brahmachari, Vivek Chaitanya from Australia, who had first seen the photograph of Swami Vivekananda in a Melbourne bookshop. He never knew of Vivekananda at that time, but the photograph conveyed to him that this man is an extraordinary man. He can't be anyone ordinary just by looking at his photograph. I know Swami Atmanand of the Raipur Ramakrishna Mission, who was the founder of Narayanpur, one of the biggest tribal welfare institutions of the mission. So he, as a 15-year-old boy, when he was in class 9 or something, in a bookshop he saw, or somewhere, on a calendar, Swami Vivekananda's photograph, and he just told himself that this man is a godlike man. I mean, he didn't know about whose photograph this is, etc. So lines of statements of Vivekananda, lines of Vivekananda, I even cited instances where looking even at photographs of Swami Vivekananda, people have fallen in love with Swami Vivekananda. And more you fall in love with Swami Vivekananda, more you will rise in your own spiritual life. So anyway, so this was basically my basic inspiration. So I wanted to also have you could say a congruence between the work I am doing and my own inner life, because I thought that when I looked at these, the kind of work I can do, say, in a mainstream corporate career, I never had any disrespect for any work. I hugely respect, say, people who have, the names I mentioned, say, Narayan Murthy or many such people, small or big, famous or not so famous, who have created large number of jobs or led the way or created a different image of India before the world. But thing was that I understood that certain competencies which are needed here, certain competencies are needed. I may or may not be having them. That's a different question. But certain competencies which I thought I have, certain, say, values which are held dear, or certain capacity, say, maybe capacity of, going out of, say, a mainstream kind of a path, or so-called capacity to sacrifice, etc. So maybe or capacities of adjusting in different environments, capacities of dropping out of one's, say, default social class, etc. So I thought that I have these capacities. So, but I thought that I can't. The corporate sector, when I looked around, I didn't think that it can in the best possible way, make use of these, special capacities which I thought I had. Maybe whether I had or not is a different question, but in my own self-concept, I thought that these certain values I hold dear, certain abilities or capacities I have of a subtler, softer nature. These are not skills in the real sense, but certain abilities nonetheless. So I thought that I should do something which is completely in line with these abilities or capacities which I have, so that there is no alienation. In today's world, we see so much alienation between, say, what one wants to be from within and what one is doing. That alienation itself is a cause of tremendous dissatisfaction, and people are, trying hard to get over that alienation. So anyway, in my case, I thought it should be not just in sync, but they should be directly related, in the sense that suppose if I strengthen these abilities or strengthen my inner life, or to go by Swami Vivekananda's thesis, if I purify myself more and more, then I should choose a work which should become more and more successful as a result of I progressing in my inner life. So both of them should have a cause and effect kind of a relationship. The more I progress, say, in my inner life, the more successful my external work should become. So I wanted to seek such a work. What I want to say is this. So in this way, I thought, I therefore decided to go by the method of elimination, to use the language of mathematics. So the things which I felt for sure, which I don't want to do. So I thought I'll start giving up on those things. So I realized that this corporate kind of, sitting for placements, I do not want to do. So I gave that, I opted out of the placement voluntarily. After the first year, I signed a placement register of opting out. And therefore I was a free person. In my year 2, I was just managing to, just barely attended classes and just managed to pass, etc., with the help of, last night crashers which my friends helped me with. So because second year is more built around the placement process, so since I'd opted out of the placement, and one reason was that it exempted me from sitting through the pre-placement talks, and which were compulsory for everyone. So I told the placement office, I took a strange case before them. They had never heard of such an appeal. I said that since I'm not availing of any benefits of the placement office, since I've opted out of the placement, I should be exempted from, going through what was, at that time a torture for me to sit through almost daily a company giving a pre-placement talk. So my second year, I became very free, and I began to get more exposure for myself. I began to visit certain, say, social organizations, big or small NGOs. So I came in touch with some certain NGOs which were working with children in Calcutta. I was in Calcutta only at that time. So anyway, during this time, I got some linkages got built with certain friends, particularly those who were doing PhD, a 5-year program at IIM, who outstayed my own batch, since they were for 2-3 years more. And I always believed they had a wider interest range than, say, the 2-year MBA students who were very narrowly focused on, the corporate sector and only read what I call pink and orange colored papers. That is the business papers. So their intellectual interests were much wider of, say, some of the PhD candidates. So they became my, friends and sounding boards. We became sounding boards to each other, I can say. In this way, 1 or 2 professors also encouraged. So in this way, like, my stay at IIM finished. Now after that, since I had opted out the placement, I was without any job. I took a small rented room. Its rent was 1,000 rupees a month. So you can well imagine what kind of room it would be. So such a room I took, and I began to take, say, whatever number of lectures I wanted to, for, say, students appearing for CAT. Say, if, they used to pay me that I enrolled or I tied up with a coaching institute for MBA entrance. So whatever I needed, small sum for just bare maintenance at that time. So those many lectures only I took. It could be 8 lectures in a month, to 8 2-hour lectures in a whole month, etc. So that left with a lot of time also, in which I was working out what I should be doing. I was still without any idea, and I had already, my batch had passed out. I lived in the hostel till the day the new batch was coming, and till the day I was asked to move out. So I tried to extend the stay as long as possible. After that, I moved to this rented room. And again, a few, months were passing. I traveled to some NGOs here and there outside, in other parts of the country also, meeting certain social entrepreneurs or say founders of both organizations. In social sector, you have two kinds of people generally. One are, say, the activists, the other are institution builders. So meeting both kinds of people, say leaders of social movements who are more like activists, and say institution builders who are not activists but they run there or build, they are more like entrepreneurs. So this kind of exposure I was getting. Then months were passing, I still didn't know what to do, and I was like in a situation of some kind of despair, though I trusted myself always. But still, months and months were passing, so it was like this. When I used to go to IIM to meet those friends, long after my batch had passed, even say security guard used to say that how long will you hang around. So all these things I increased my despair in some way. But then I thought, what can I do in social sector? At that time I wrote some articles, 3-4 articles for the Outlook magazine, which had a 1-page column called Making a Difference, which features certain social initiatives. So these kind of things I was doing. I also dabbled in some fiction writing, etc. So published on certain, websites, etc. At that time, literary websites, certain short story, etc. So anyway, those kind of things. So, but what exactly I want to do in this, social sphere, I wasn't clear of. Then I asked myself, what can I do? There are a whole lot of things. One can work in, say, environment, in livelihoods, with say farmers, rural development, so many different kinds of domains. I understood that lots of these things need a great know-how of that particular domain or a certain domain expertise. I didn't have any. And I was sure that I made up in my mind that I won't work anywhere, even in an NGO. So I won't take up a job. If whatever I do, it will be on my own. So it will be an entrepreneurial venture in some way, initiative in some way. So then I asked myself, what do I have? Any entrepreneurship, I think, starts with these 3 things. One is who you are, basically your own traits, inclinations. It's more the inner kind of ability set which I mentioned. The second is what you have, which means these kind of components. It could be your education, it could be your certain domain expertise, etc. Third, very interestingly, is who you have, your own network, associations, etc., which you can possibly leverage, possibly take help from. So it starts in this way. And it's not, I actually read a very interesting paper on entrepreneurship recently. And it actually contrasted, say, an entrepreneurial work with any other kind of work. Whereas any other kind of work is, goal driven. It has certain preset goals, and you have certain resources including abilities, competency set, and other hard financial resources, etc., whatever. And then using these resources to reach that goal. Whereas, that paper said that this is very causal. It said that it's a causal kind of a relationship. From resources, you try to reach that goal in the optimal kind of manner. Whereas entrepreneurship is just opposite of that. And I agree with this actually, with my own experience. It's that you don't have any preset goal in entrepreneurship. You just continuously keep viewing what you have. These resources, who you are, what you have, and who you have, and then try to, it's very effectual. The various possible effects you see what all effects it can have. And any of those effects can become a goal. So goals keep changing in an entrepreneurial journey. Some company may have started in some way, but it, on its course it changed its way. There are so many instances if you read about successful entrepreneurs, how they started, how certain opportunities came. They revised their goals. I mean, it wasn't that they were working towards one goal, a predefined, predetermined goal, but they kept on looking at their resources and, manipulated or worked through their resources, kept on increasing the resource set. And through that, whatever new goals emerge, they tried that. So in this way, I thought that what I have and I thought that since these domain expertise I do not have, the best I have is these, like the two key values, like I thought I hold dear, and it had some emotional resonance within me. It's of love and care, very simply speaking. And these are universal values everyone else has. So I thought that let my work be such which manifests these two values, love and care. Now this is a very important point because lots of entrepreneurial ventures start with an idea. So its motivation or its driving force is cerebral in nature. Whereas in my case it was not cerebral in nature because I didn't have any big idea. It didn't start from an idea. It started from certain sentiments, certain values, and the work that I wanted to do, in my view, I wanted to be an outcome or a epitome or manifestation of those particular values or sentiment, love and care, very simply. So I thought that I thought of this very simple thing that what's the most basic example of, say, love and care, just like how in a family we live together. And so I thought of bringing up children who do not have anyone. And just like, say, at that time I was very young, I was around 25 or so. So I thought more in terms of elder sibling. Today I'll say as a parent or father, but at that time I thought that bringing up children as an elder brother. So that was the spirit. I thought, let me start a home. So this was the beginning. Home for children who do not have anyone, most destitute, say orphan children who have lost both their parents, or living mother is there in extreme poverty who has either lost her husband or the husband has deserted, abandoned. Children have become homeless, living on railway platforms or on the roadside under these plastic covers, etc. So such kind of conditions. Girl children from highly vulnerable areas, vulnerable to being trafficked into flesh trade, into all other forms of victimization, exploitation. So I had this kind of certain exposure and linkages I had already built during my year to a time while I was engaging with NGOs. So here who you have actually came to my help, because that network, some kind of network I had stuck. And in this way, this was the thing. I later expanded to very impoverished tribal areas in Jharkhand and West Bengal. That came much later, 4 or 5 years after that, after my beginning, because it needed an organization muscle to create a extensive field network across, say, number of villages in these Adivasi areas and in 2 districts, Jharkhand, 5-6 districts in West Bengal. So, but these were the domains where starvation conditions were there. People and children used to eat, say, jungle shrubs, boil those jungle shrubs. One time only they used to eat some amount of rice, and that too it's a boiled, what they used to call jungle shrubs, jungli aloo, which is very different from the aloo that we eat. It's not marketed because it's not considered to be, it's not consumed by other people. So this was the kind of lifestyle. And say children and everyone taking to forest liquor, etc. of mahua and these things at the age of say 11, 12. Child marriages being rampant at the age of say 12, 13, 14, that kind. So this thing. So in a small rented building, I think 30 minutes are over. So you can also just sound me when I am around 45, 50 minutes. Okay. So at that time, I first, like any good MBA student, we thought that all things can be done by writing a proposal, like a what we call a B plan, business plan, etc. So people advise you, why don't you make a B plan for this? You will get all this funding, etc. So I made a proposal, report, etc., and then sought appointments with some executives in various companies. That to some extent I could manage because of our IIM network, but it didn't lead me anywhere because nobody wanted to, bid on something which is not there. I mean, it's just a wishful thinking of one individual. Today he's saying this thing, tomorrow he'll not be there. Maybe he'll take up a job or he'll fail and then leave that. So it was like this. So many of my months, 5-6 more months, were lost in this. Like writing emails to corporate people to seek appointments or to send mails or sometimes phone conversation. I was very bad at that because this cold calling I could never do. I can't do it still. So unless I am introduced to someone, I can't even make a conversation. That had been my disability and it still exists. So that's why in my sales and marketing, we had to do a marketing research course at IIM, in which we had to take our questionnaire and travel through the city. So I used to travel throughout the day with still coming with all blank questionnaires. So that was my situation. So I was very bad at that and anyway miserably failed. So all these months were lost. But I thought that I have to do something. So I made some elementary computations. At that time I was thinking of say buying some land because my proposal was also big in nature. It included land, building, all these things. Then say talking of say X number of children in year 1, year 2, all these things. But things don't go as per plans. I mean, most entrepreneurs will tell you that. So it was just that act first, ready, fire, and aim, as some entrepreneurs put it. Not ready, aim and fire, ready, fire and then aim. Or ready, go and steady, not ready, steady and go. So just act first and then adjust. So it was like in this way. I thought that I'll rent a building. Its rent was 11,000. I surveyed some rented buildings at that. And then I made some competition that for say 30-40 children, say 6-7 lakh rupees a month annually will be needed. 7-8 lakh, that kind. Monthly say 50,000. I was planning to start in a very small manner. I thought that for 1 year only 30-40 children. So I thought that if I increase my own delivery of lectures at this for IIM candidates, I can a reasonable amount of money I myself can raise. Of course, I couldn't have given all my time for that because I needed to build this, but still I increased that right from very early morning. Then I took some sessions, or one day out of 3-4 days I took whole day these sessions, so back-to-back sessions. So this kind of thing. Then some other few friends were there. My mother was my first supporter and owner. So she was being a very simple lady. My father was more practical. So practical people have more complicated thinking. But my mother, being a very simple person, she was almost worshipful of me. So she thought that she went by a very simple premise that whatever, if you're doing good, nothing bad can happen to that kind of thing. So anyway, like this was the thing. So, and a few friends also, not necessarily from IIM, some from my earlier association, 1 or 2 who had worked with me at Infosys or were at IIT, these kind of things, or were in the school who had gone to some other college. So anyway, a few people like this. I also then thought one day it struck me that all the great work in this world has been done by individuals. We unnecessarily think of collectives. It has been my firm belief that collective is a delusionary thing. I mean, a kind of a maya, one could say. In collectives also there is, in successful collectives there is one influential individual who actually influences others. So the power within an individual will always be an important factor. So I thought, why am I trying with these impersonal entities? People who don't have that decision making capacity, sending to a big corporate, etc. Why not, write personal emails to say IIM alumni and instead ask for very, very small sums, token amounts from them. Now it's then up to them whether they want to do. Answer only binary, yes or no. It won't be some kind of complicated stretching around, extending the thing. So from using IIM's directory, IIM Calcutta's alumni directory, I wrote to some say 1,000 plus alumni, saying that I am starting this from this day. I had actually started at that time. I didn't seek any donations before that. I started through my own lecturing, etc., these things, and through some friend support. The deposit of this rented building was 50,000, which I had some small money with me, and the balance one of my friends actually paid. So in this way actually I started. Then out of these alumni, 20, 25, 30 responded to me, which percentage wise was of course small, but I got tremendously encouraged at that time, because I thought that when this work has not even begun or barely begun, there are people who have never seen me, never visited this, I have never spoken to them physically, they are showing trust in me. So I got tremendous encouragement. So this belief that always engaging with individuals, seeing individuals as live people, and having some kind of force within them who can be inspired. Individuals can inspire as well as can be inspired, and that makes them live people. Many times impersonal collectives, impersonal entities can never be inspired, because they follow their own institutional procedures in such a way that the capacity to be inspired has been eliminated. So anyway, I always felt comfortable working and engaging with individuals. Now in this way it went on. So some of these people, then after a certain time I began to ask them, when I had set up a bank account and all this, I started to invite contributions. Then some of those people visited, they then, though the efforts are very small, I rented building, but since everything was tangible, at the end of 5 months I had 50 children. I also got encouraged, and I was slightly, aggressive in, you could say, endeavoring, and I thought that support will, because the trend was clear to me that support can flow in, will flow in. So this is after 6 months I had 50, 55 children. Then some new contacts got developed in a bigger league. At the end of 1 year I could take some land, first a 2-acre land. So in this way it started. In my first financial year our collections were 9-10 lakh rupees. That was all we needed at that time. It went to 70 lakhs in the second year itself, because we purchased land, started some construction. From 50, say first 3 children, then after 15 days around 16 children, after 6 months 55, at the end of 1 year around 69, 70 children. It has come to now 1,000 children. This video mentioned 700, so it's a 2.5, 3-year-old video. So now in this way it started. Similarly for financial resource wise, from that level now raising around say 10 crore rupees annually, half of which is for OPEX. We are continuously scaling up. So last year I raised more than 10 crore rupees and 4 or 5 crores for infrastructure development. So we have now around 20 acres of land, boys residential campus different, girls residential campus different. And in next 3 years, infrastructure development for 2,500 children in next 5 years. That is going on. So it's on an upscale trajectory ever since I started it actually. So, but I wanted to emphasize that it had very small beginnings and unplanned beginnings. I wanted to highlight that with unplanned beginnings. So I had thought in the proposal I used to circulate among say corporate circles. I used to say that for first 3 years I'll have 40 children, year 1, year 2, year 3, and then I talked of scaling up. But I never imagined that within 3 years, without any corporate support, I'll have say 5-7 acres of land and more than 250 children at the end of 3 years. So this opportunity just came, and it's just making use of those opportunities, always resetting your goals. Also, this one particular idea I want to share, I think I'll exceed my time. So it's just that many things we realize while we are on the course. Like after a few months, I realized that this gives a tremendous scope of, I mean, my nature of my work being residential institution. I was staying there. I was living 24 hours with the children and other what I called seva vratis. Designed a inspiring sounding name, seva vratis, people vowed to the ideal of service. So not a worker or an employed staff, etc. So seva vratis, everyone was a seva vrati. So I just realized that this residential nature, like an ashram, it gives a tremendous scope of what in sociology is called a total institution. In sociology, there is a concept of total institution where examples of total institution are, say, it can be a monastery, it can be a convent, it can be a cantonment, military cantonment, any kind of thing where, the difference between personal life and the work you live, community life or the work life is diminished to a very, very significant extent. So this has its own, advantages. Of course, I always had a model before me of the Ramakrishna order and its institutions, and observing other total institutions also, say some practices, say from maybe the culture in an army cantonment, etc. Whatever. What I'm saying is that it opened up new frontiers of imagination before me, which I never realized when I was starting. So what I want to emphasize on, new dimensions come. I then designed my most importantly, my HR on those lines. Began to engage with such people, took people who will be very dedicated and work for whole of their life, even if they are from very humble backgrounds or maybe having very so-called very ordinary, say, educational qualification, etc. But in various roles, I always looked at a person, looked at the individual. So I did what was opposite of recruitment. In recruitment, when we talk of recruitment in a corporate manner, it goes by this, that you have a role in your mind and then you look for a person who fits that role. What I was doing was just opposite of recruitment. When I became interested in that person, I took him or her, and then I thought what role he can play, what space he can create for himself or herself. So in this, when people evolve, people are groomed, people develop. I didn't mind a person, evolving over a few years, because I was looking for spans of maybe next 25, 30 years or more. When I am taking, say, a 25-year-old or 20, some cases even younger people, they can work for maybe 3 decades or more actively with me. So that was my idea. On those lines, I actually continued. Now here, like one particular thing I also want to share, talking of motivation. This, in hindsight, when I analyze, I think that motivation is generally of, it has 2 dimensions to it. One, I like to call it is the ambition dimension, or another name we can give it is a milestone dimension, where you are motivated by certain milestones before you. For example, if somebody is running a company, then suppose it is of 10 crore rupees turnover, having a milestone of making it 50 crores or 100 or 500. These are milestones over a certain timeline, which would inspire us, motivate us. This is an important dimension, definitely. But there is a much deeper dimension, which I like to call the anchoring dimension, anchor dimension. Or a substitute word could be a mission dimension, which is independent of the milestones. Because like milestones in the ambition dimension, you were driven or motivated by milestones which you have before you. It's very important, the milestone dimension, because it helps in planning. When you have already started your work, you need to plan also, setting goals, etc. within a certain time frame. But this mission dimension or anchoring dimension is independent of this. It just means that it's your second nature. It's your, why second nature? It's your first nature, essential nature, which you are manifesting. So it's your swabhav. I mean, talking in terms of, the Gita, it's a swabhav then. You are just simply manifesting your swabhav. You can't live without it, basically. So, I think all entrepreneurs, particularly in the social sphere, because in social sphere we deal with lots of human lives and our actions have a tremendous impact on other lives around us. It comes with tremendous responsibility, therefore. So one can't just like in an adventuristic streak, start a venture or close it down one fine day when one is bored or fatigued, etc. It comes with a tremendous responsibility. So this anchoring dimension actually like ensures this. If you have this feeling that this is what my life is for, this is what my life is for. Because I asked myself when I was starting this, I thought that, say suppose after 10 years, I have to live with say 20 children only, because my work suppose remains at that level and I have to keep on say taking lectures for IIM entrance exams, and in this way only carrying my life. Will I be fine with it? That was a question before myself. And when within myself I got a, yes as the answer, then only I became sure that, yeah, this is independent of the milestones. It's not that certain milestones which are driving me. Milestones are useful. They help in planning, sometimes on a day-to-day basis also motivate us, motivate others in our team, our colleagues, etc. But within ourselves we need a much deeper stratum, a much deeper level dimension of motivation, which is the anchoring dimension. I think it's essentially a spiritual quality. The anchoring dimension of motivation is essentially a spiritual quality, as against the milestone dimension, which is more cerebral in nature. So this is one thing which I wanted to share with you, because during nascent stages of any entrepreneurial initiative and during crisis times can come at any point of time later on in the lifetime of an organization. So during both these times, it's the anchoring dimension which will keep on energizing you. It won't be the milestone dimension, because when you are in crisis, your company is sinking or your social initiative or anything that is collapsing in a very difficult condition, you won't think of, these milestones won't inspire you at that. You are totally unclear of how the future will be. It's like being in the midst of an ocean and, hanging on to a log of wood in the middle of an ocean. It's like this. You don't know where you will reach, but that is your swabhava to hang on to it. You are anchored to it. It's essentially a spiritual quality. Now this thing I wanted to share. This actually, I was just thinking a few minutes before this, while sitting on the dais, this one idea struck me which I want to share with you. It was from my Gurudev Swami Ranganathananji, from whom I got my Diksha. So he always used to say about service or attitude of service, seva bhav. He said in very simple terms, service is this line: what can I do for you? This simple line, if it is there in the backs of our mind, in all or any interpersonal transactions, it could be with anyone. When we talk of service, why do we think only of, say, privileged ones serving, say, underprivileged? It can be between equals, or it can be serving even a more privileged person than you. Service is of different kinds at different occasions. So even sometimes, say, smiling at a person, thing like this, which doesn't need any resources, or with great sincerity asking about one's well-being, or expressing your real, genuine, empathy at a particular feeling which someone else has. All these are also acts of service. They don't need any resources, and they are actually like, it's a 24-hour thing. And it brings me to one of my favorite lines, one utterance of Swami Ranganathananji, that there is no holiday in spiritual life. This was one of his lines: there is no holiday in spiritual life. It's a 24/7 thing, It was long before these call centers and BPOs had come. Spiritual life was a 24/7 occupation, 24/7 vocation. So it was this attitude of service, having just this, what can I do for you, in your mind at all, in all interactions with whosoever. I think this is true service. We don't need to start an organization. You don't need to start a social enterprise, an NGO, or figure out a social domain. say of destitute children or ailing women or whatever. If you do that, if it's your calling, it's fine. But even in regular life, one can always manifest this seva bhav. This is very important. And you know, Ranganathananji spoke of these three levels of force or power or strength in any being, and in human being particularly. He said, he mentioned Bahubal, then Buddhibal as the first two. Bahubal meaning, you know, muscular physical power, Buddhibal, the cerebral mind power, and the third one, Atmabal or the Yogbal basically, which is very, very interesting. To illustrate this, like everyone knows what Bahubal, even animals, beasts or say dinosaurs or elephants or whale, it can have a huge Bahubal, physical power, raw physical power. Buddhibal, human beings had Buddhibal, that's why they captured and came to the top of the kingdom of living beings and could control other beings. But you know, Ranganathanji mentioned one particular idea. This I want to share with you, as you know, before we start taking questions. He mentioned about Sir Julian Huxley. Sir Julian Huxley being one of the most eminent biologists of the 20th century. So Julian Huxley actually said that now what the certain force which will now be needed and which will determine the direction of civilization and of human beings in times to come will not be the Bahubal or the Buddhibal. The explanation he gave for this was that through Buddhibal, human being has first of all created those things which can be substituted for say Bahubal. For example, you know, we can't have wings like birds, but we have actually created say aeroplanes which are a substitute for that, or more efficient substitute for that. You can like imagine, and so many examples will be there. So basically he said that this physical evolution, what Julian Huxley said was that physical evolution is no more required. It's a very, very powerful revolutionary idea, that physical evolution is no more required because through Buddhibal, human beings can create external organs. They don't need to develop those organs within yourself. You don't need to, you know, evolve for millions of years to have wings, because you have created an aeroplane. To swim, you don't need to create the organs which a fish uses to swim, because you have made a ship, and which is an external organ. So organs don't need to be biologically developed within the physical organism, but through Bahubal, external organs. So all machines, all tools therefore are external organs which are substitutes of some kind of a Bahubal using the Buddhibal. Now this Ranganathananji posed this question, that in certain question, is Buddhibal the highest form of bal? This is a very challenging question, because generally we think it is so. Our education system also mainly highlight this, that Bahubal, human beings are superior because of Buddhibal, cerebral power, mind power, brain, because of brain we rule. But he just pose certain situation. For example, a very basic situation to a say government employee, ordinary government employee. If somebody is say offering a bribe of X rupees, 10,000 rupees for task to be done, how will he respond? If he says no, suppose if he says no, I won't take, from where, what force is actually helping him to take this decision? Certainly it's not related to Bahubal in any way. Is it related to Buddhibal? Maybe the Buddhi will say that if you take this 10,000 and if you work out that you will not get caught, then it's a good decision, because then you can buy all this, or you can do these things for your family. So if he says no, from where, from what level is it coming? So Ranganathananji used to say that in such situations, it doesn't come from the Bahubal, doesn't come from the Buddhibal, it comes from a third level, which is the Atmabal. And this is what, the moral authority, the spiritual quality, spiritual power of purity, power of selflessness, which Maharaj mentioned, and which Swamiji always, emphasize. That was the central theme of Swamiji, essential divinity within all human beings. This X factor. This is why I called it an X factor in the beginning of my talk, because it can't be articulated by an intellectual construct. There is no intellectual construct which explains it. So this Atmabal, this inspires us. Similarly, in any kind of situations or temptation, if we are able to win in that situation, it's not because of Buddhibal. Buddhibal will not help us. All through our academics, even in institutions like IITs, or it can be MIT or Harvard, anywhere, emphasis is on the Buddhibal, how to refine it, fine tune it, but not on, how to develop the Atmabal, how in fact to refine your own emotions, because these emotions are very closely related to the Atmabal. That will be a digression, but a tangential reference I want to make here, because Swamiji always said that emotional training is required. We don't have enough emotional training. He used to say all our education is about intellectual training, refining and training our emotions, our feelings, because at the end of the day, heart is the seat of all power. It's Swamiji's line, not mine. Knowledge and wisdom are mere superfluities. The surface glitter merely. It's the heart which is the seat of all power. This is his line. So, to wrap it up, before we take any questions, I think like such a kind of a force in some way we should try to develop within ourselves. And the beauty of this is that it passes on. It's very, very tangible. It passes on, it has its effect. It's sure to have its effect. It's a law. It's sure to have its effect on others. That is how inspirational, people operate. They know, they are sometimes very conscious of that force within themselves also, and it rubs off. It's bound to rub on to other people. So, and with this only we'll have the seva bhav attitude of what can I do for you. This attitude which every moment we can carry, and we should carry, because as Ranganathanji mentions, so spiritual life is a 24/7 vocation. There is no holiday in spiritual life. So with these words, I want to end my, this talk before we take the questions. Thank you. Yeah.